everybody, and welcome to another hobby cheating video. And today we're going to talk about horns. So I'm working on this dragon head here for a base. This poor dragon, I'm sorry to say, did not make it, but that's okay. So we're going to basically talk about horns today. And this was another popular request that I got. A lot of people wanted to see this. So there's sort of two different methods of doing horns, and you see the heavy metal team do it a lot, where they go from sort of a bright lower horn up to like a black tip. I'm not as big of a fan of that. It doesn't really occur very much in nature. It's more darker down here, and it goes up toward sort of a lighter color, which if you think about it, it mimics kind of your own nails, right? Like your nail starts at a certain color and then gets white at the end where it's sort of whatever. Although you do have this lighter color down here too. But anyway, today we're going to go from dark to light. The technique that I'm going to show you is really the same either way. It doesn't really matter. Go in either direction you like. That's the short story there. But we're going to start dark at the base because I like that. To me, that's just the way it looks. Now, the other big decision you have to make when you're doing horns, you have to think about whether you're really going to push the striations. Some people really push the striations, the vertical, and by striations I mean dark vertical lines going up and down in this direction in the horns. Horns, the material, I mean, this is a dragon head. There are no dragons in the world. But if you look at, like, deer and other creatures like that, certainly their antlers and horns have striations in them. Okay? So this is a toy that my dog has. All right? This is an antler. Okay? This is like an antler from a big deer or something, right? You can see where it's been cut, whatever. It's a chew toy for the dog. So if you look at this, it's very rough textured, and you'll notice this sort of like there's a lot of darker spots in the recesses here, and it gets lighter up towards certain places in the horn, right? So this antler would continue up. But you can see the coloration here has like these browns, it has these blacks in it, that kind of thing. So this is a good sort of guide to go off of, something like this. And you can also see there is this vertical sort of striation pattern, but it doesn't really follow, like, it's not that the darkness moves up in lines, it's just that there's a texture that's vertical, right? So you can see how these lines tend to move up along the horn. Like there, it's very clear right here, these three lines. Okay? All right, so that's the kind of thing we want to try to mimic. Now, let's get our dragon head back. So the way we're going to do that is mainly through successive shades to start. So I've got my Seraphim sepia, my Agrax, and I've got some sepia ink. If I was ever going to recommend to pick up a single ink, like a Vallejo ink, it would be this sepia ink. I believe you can get it individually on Amazon or something. It's probably a couple bucks. Totally worth it. I use this ink more than just about any other. It's one of the more useful paints in my collection. All right, so how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to start with sepia, and really our first step is going to be, pretty straightforward. We're going to get in that sepia, and we're just going to drag it down. The name of this game is going to be brush control, because everything is going to go in a certain direction. Part of how we're going to sort of create this illusion of the striations is through making sure we move our brush in a particular direction. So the paint is always being applied going down. Now, we don't want to let it really pool too much. You can let it get a little bit on the bottom, but for the most part, we're just going to move it down. And we're just pushing the paint down toward the lower portions. Again, we never go up. We're never pushing the paint up. When the brush is on the model, we're going down. Okay? Obviously, make sure you get all the horns. You got to turn it all around. Okay? All right. And that's about it. You notice I started from about halfway up the thing. You can go kind of as high as you want. Doesn't really matter. You just want to let it dry. Whatever area feels comfortable to you. It's not too important. All right, so I'm going to get the rest of this guy real quick. We're going to get these back areas the same, these little ridge bones. So we just want to fill those in. We're going to follow the same pattern on them. They're going to be dark toward the bottom and lighter up top. You'll notice one side of this dragon is way darker than the other. That's because he's going to be sitting with that side down. And I don't really care as much because it's going to be mostly covered. Like, he's going to sit like that and be mostly covered on that side. So it's going to be in heavy shadow. Okay. Now, nothing about this bone pattern is complicated. Unfortunately, it's going to require time just because we have to let it dry in between each application of the shade. So one of the most important things you want to do when you're doing this is you always want to make sure that each shade layer dries completely. So there's going to be a lot of stop starts in this as I let everything dry and then we come back. So we'll be back in just a second. Alright, and we're back and our seraphim sepia is all dry. So next up, we're going to go to our agrax. And this is going to be more or less fairly straightforward. We're just going to grab some of it and we're going to pull it down. We're going to start lower and we're going to pull it down all the way again. So this time we're going to start somewhere down here. The technique is the same. Again, we are always pulling down with our color, never up. Directionality with your brush means a lot. It's a big, big deal in general when you're painting, and it's especially a big deal here. I'm always tapping off the edge of the wash because I don't want that much of it on my brush. Shades are pretty powerful when they're put over light colors like white or bone or something, so you don't need a lot to move the needle. Okay? So, there we go. Now you can see we're starting to get some darkness there. Okay, so then same thing. I'm just going to do it back here onto this. Now, here again in a second, we're going to pause. So, because again, this is the kind of thing where I have to let a lot of stuff dry. But here's what I'm going to do in between the now and the next time you see this. What's going to happen is I'm going to do both of those steps I just did again. So that is to say, I'm going to take the seraphim sepia, start up here, like in the middle, and go down. Then I'm going to take the agrax and start here in the middle and go down. And I'm going to do that just to really saturate the wash in there. Okay? So, next time you see it, both of those things are going to have happened. Alright? We'll be back in a minute. Alright, and we are back. And as you can see, so I did exactly as I said. I applied another layer of the sepia and another layer of the agrax. Now, I didn't start them at exactly the same place. Like I started the seraphim maybe a little higher, the agrax maybe a little higher or lower, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point being, mix it around. You're not trying to like demarcate this point and go down. That's my sepia line. And demarcate this point and go down. That's my agrax line. That's the opposite of what you want to do. Because by placing them around slightly differently, what we're doing is we're getting this nice, smooth transition. You can see there you can't really, it's just naturally getting darker. And that's what we want to achieve. Okay, so next up we're going to build up our striations a little. Now, I'm not a huge fan of having like incredibly like stark striations. I think they look silly. I don't know what that looks like in nature. That's my own personal opinion. You can do it however you want. I like a little bit of more of the a soft striation. So I've got some sepia ink here on my palette with a little thinner medium. So I'm going to pull some of that out in with the thinner here. And obviously it's watered down since we're on the wet palette. But sepia ink is naturally very strong. So I've got a thinner brush with a nicer point here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just pulling down more or less in stripes. Okay? Now I'm not going to start all these at the same point. I'm going to go up higher with some. I'm going to go lower with some. Now, it's not going to be, it's going to be a very soft striation. Because for the most part, when they get down here where it's super dark, it shouldn't be as visible. It'll only really be visible up top. Okay. So again, same thing. So we can see what I'm doing here. I'm taking a point and I pull down just the tip there. Okay. So again, we just keep doing that. Make our way all the way around. And the goal is to create that impression of striations, not hard lines. Okay? You can see how it's in there. It's not overwhelmingly obvious. We'll work that into the to the back bones here as well, the ridge bones. Focus this more just in the very recesses. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let that dry. And then I'm going to take an even finer brush, okay, with a finer point. I'm going to find, once that's totally dry and I see exactly how dark it is, I'm going to take a finer brush and I'm going to trace right down the center of that striation, okay? So I can probably do that here on camera because it's probably going to dry pretty quick. And since we're not applying a large amount of paint at all. Now, again, we want to be careful with this. When you're doing successive shade layers like this, you always want to make sure you let it dry. I'm being a little fast and irresponsible because I'm recording this. You could afford to give it another 30 seconds or a minute. Because if you don't want to, the problem with applying these shades, they're very wet. You're wetting acrylic paint. Acrylic paint reacts with water. I think you can see where this goes. You can pull the paint up very easy. So now with my sharp brush, I'm going to go in and find the center of the line, and at the center lower part of it, I'm just going to trace it out. So in the very center of these lines, I'm going to reinforce that striation here down in the darker portions. The idea being, again, by doing this twice, what we get is a more natural transition. By the way, you don't have to stop at 2. If you really want to go all the way, you can keep pushing this. Just very lightly pushing these simple lines in your previous lines. Getting darker and darker, covering less and less, so that way you have a nice, obvious transition all the way down. Okay? You notice if the brush squiggles a little bit or it doesn't quite hit exactly where you want, that's okay. No big deal. Because again, we're being subtle, so hence it's all right. We can go back. We don't have mistakes when we're working like this. So now we've got the hint of those striations showing through pretty strong throughout. Okay? All right. So I'm just touching this up real quick, getting the side nice and dark because we want that to be nice and dark. Even though you can't really see it, I'm going to know it's there. Okay, so maybe one final touch real quick here down at the very bottom just to get that nice and really called out. Okay, so there we go. So now we've got a nice dark transition down at the bottom. Now you could keep pushing this, by the way. If you wanted really dark horns before you went to the striations, or even after that, you could apply very lightly a little Nuln Oil or something like that. You could do more layers of Agrax to get it down darker. This is about as dark as I like to go. Just at my own personal taste. There's no right or wrong answer with that. It's whatever you like. Okay, so now we've got to take the other side of the horn up, and that's the key. So with that, we're going to turn to some ivory and aged white. Again, doesn't really matter. You don't have to have the Vallejo Model Air stuff. It's not about a particular paint. It's about having a bone color and an off-white color. That's the key. Whatever 2 colors or paint ranges you have that is a bone and an off-white. That's all that matters. So like an ivory and a bone. And yes, there is a difference there. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to blend this up, and we want to start taking the highlights up. So again, white's always fairly, like thinned white is often fairly translucent. It dries darker than it shows when you initially do it. So, but we're going to take our thinner medium, get on in there, make sure the paint's nice and watered. So we've got something fairly thin. And now we're going to move in the opposite direction up the horns, because you can see that's a little stark there on the end. So what we want to do now is just start drawing it up. Okay. Again, so I'm starting with my ivory, and it's thin. I'm going to focus on trying to smooth out the edges of those lines where my sepia was, right? And you can see now we've kind of cut out a little of that that harsh transition there. And that's what we want. We're going to get to that nice, smooth blend. I'm going to do the same thing on the back here. Okay. So, and again, because we're working in these thinned paints and glazing it, it's going to dry pretty fast. You want to let it dry completely. And then basically, at a slightly higher point, we're going to take the same color we just did, and we're going to apply another layer of it. So we're going to start a little higher than we did last time, just like we started a little lower with the dark. Same color, same paint still on the brush, but white has this thing where the more layers of it you put on, the more intense it gets. Because again, it's a fairly transparent paint. Okay, so now we're starting to get some real action. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of our thinner, we're going to go into our ivory and draw some of that into our off-white. And we're going to go ahead and just go up higher. And we're going to get just the tops of the tips. Right? Nice and easy. Same thing here. Get the tops of these little guys. We always want to make sure all the bone is moving together when we do this. Now, I put that on with some thinner, and it's still a little wet, so I rinse off my brush, get it nice and wet, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just smooth the edge with no paint on the brush. I just kind of fuzz that edge a little and just kind of blend that down. While that paint's still wet, you just kind of spit blend that a little. Okay? Alright, so now we're getting a nice transition from dark up to very light. So now we're going to go back into the thinner, get a little of our pure aged white. And now we're going to hit just the very tippy tops of these things, or just a tiny bit more. Okay. All right. There you go. Now we got the little tippy tops. The last step is we take a regular stark white. And this is where people often go wrong, because they often do way too much of this. And this real stark white would be extremely rare. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little of that very stark white. We're going to get it just on the tip of the brush. Okay, so I don't have much. And I'm literally just going to touch the tip. Think of it almost like an edge highlight, just on the very point, right? It just catches, it's where the light would catch, just on the tip of that horn. That's all we're trying to catch. Okay? So now what we've got is that. We can see some striations, we've got a nice transition, it's very smooth. Now we're going to get the secret. So, how do we take it up all the way? First of all, you can stop here, by the way, or you could have not done any number of these steps. But if we want to take it up all the way, what are we going to do? We've still got a little bit of our seraphim sepia. So we're going to do two things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get a little of our seraphim sepia on our palette. Okay? Not the ink, just the regular seraphim sepia. We're going to touch our watered down ivory. We're going to kind of mix those together. And that shade will naturally also thin that paint, because shade is mostly medium. And then what I'm going to do is here in the middle part, in between these two, I'm just going to run a nice thin glaze over in both directions. I'm going to pull down from the top and up toward the middle, and I'm going to try to basically meet in the center somewhere. This just is like smoothing out our transition all the way, because we want this to be very organic, no stark lines, nothing like that. Okay? It doesn't have a huge effect, and that's okay. We don't want a huge effect. We're just smoothing those blends out. Just nice and gentle. Okay? Now we're getting somewhere where it's nice and smooth. If you want, we can even for the side of our brush, we can almost just edge highlight down a slight line to create the illusion of like a high point, right? Down into the horn. Something like that. So now you can see that lighter ridge. Again, you can go again here. Just using the brush almost in an edge highlighting style. Just creates our striations. We can go back into our thinner, go back into our straight white. Or straight, I shouldn't say straight white, I'm sorry. Into our straight bone color. Apologize. And we can still just take a little of that and just go over it. The key with doing these really smooth blends is just you keep applying very thin layers over and over again in slightly different places so that all the paint is just laying on top of each other slightly differently, just getting all in each other's business, and that's what we want. That's how we get our nice smooth blends. Nice thin paints worked and built up over multiple layers. Okay? Alright, so now we're going to get, you could repeat that as much as you like. If you're happy with that, there you go. And now we're going to get to the very final step. Okay. So, the very final step with this, with these horns, is unusual. We've done all this brown, we've done all this white, but we have no real visual interest going on here. Okay? Let's shut that because tipping that over is a nightmare. By visual interest, color creates visual interest. Okay? Think of like a black and white movie versus a color movie. Which one is more exciting to your eyes? Browns, whites, blacks, not visually interesting. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to our old favorite calamari orange. Now, I don't know the equivalent of this in other ranges, but it's a orangey brown color. I'm sure there's other stuff out there. You could also probably use like deep ochres would work for this. Some very browny yellows would probably also work for this. But this is mine. I love this calamari orange. One of my favorite colors of all time. This is from scale 75. You can get it alone, or it comes in their non-metallic gold set, if you're curious. We're going to get just a little bit of that out on our palette. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Okay. So now we're going to go into, what we're going to do is we're going to have a wet brush. We're going to go heavy into our thinner. We're going to just draw out a little bit of that paint and then water it down. Because we want this to be a glaze, a true glaze. Very, very, very watery. Let's look at the back of my thumb where I have all this white I've been testing. See that? That's probably still too much. Orange is pretty powerful. There we go. Just very subtle. And then what we're going to do is in this middle portion here in between the two, going down towards the darker part where it won't be visible, we're going to glaze in that orange. Now, this is not going to have a huge effect. It's going to be extremely minimal. But it does so much. Because even though it's not incredibly coming through on camera, what it does is it just adds this very slight tinge of color to your bone, of real, honest-to-God color. You know, like something on the color wheel. And that little bit of difference, that little orange, just makes such a massive difference in the way your eye perceives it. I really can't stress it enough. Having something that creates just a little bit of visual interest like that beyond the browns is a huge, huge deal. Not to mention the fact, because we're working in this nice thin glaze, it's also going to help smooth out all our transitions even more. So now what we've got is that right there. Nice, smooth horns. There you go. Going from very dark to very light with a lot of visual interest going on in the middle. So, there you go. That's how you do horns. I hope that was helpful to you. Like I said, there are other methods. You could always push the striations harder if you wanted to by, having more precise lines, spending more time carving them out. That's fine. But there you go. Hope you enjoyed that technique. And as always, like it if you like it. Subscribe if you want to see more hobby cheating. We'll see you next time.